Welcome to Therapy Cable. I'm Dr. Ehsan Gharadjedaghi, Dr. G for short, founder of Therapy Cable, and this is Interfaith Crossroads. I'm very excited to have a wonderful guest here with me. Reverend Dr. Peggy Price is here with us today at Therapy Cable, and we are very excited to get this show rolling. This is a new show that we have put together for certain purposes that we will discuss today. But before we talk about the purpose and mission and our vision for the Interfaith Crossroads, I would like to ask Reverend Dr. Peggy Price introduce herself to you, our wonderful viewers and listeners.
Thank you very much. It's very nice to be here, Dr. G, and I appreciate your inviting me to be part of this.
Thank you.
I'm a minister in the Center for Spiritual Living. My home church is in Seal Beach, California. I've been in the ministry for nearly 20 years. It was a dream of mine as a child to become a minister. I have also been active for that same amount of time in the interfaith movement, and I'm a founding member of the Greater Huntington Beach Interfaith Council. I also serve as an ambassador to the Parliament of the World's Religions, which will be taking place in October of this year. And I've also worked to have the city of Huntington Beach become a city of compassion, which is really my heart's work right now.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much. Welcome. And we are delighted to have you here, especially when I can give our viewers a little bit background. About 2-3 weeks ago at the Interfaith Council in Costa Mesa, there was a gathering of basically community leaders coming together from different faiths, as well as the chiefs of police of 3 cities, Costa Mesa, Irvine, and Newport Beach, I believe. So we had a great discussion, and it seems that this idea of interfaith community is really picking up, and more people are realizing the importance of community coming together, not only for community policing, and that's why we had the chiefs of police there to kind of educate everybody or share stories how we can come together and help one another, but also in terms of creating bridges between faiths of people of different faiths. And as much as I, for instance, from my own background as a clinical psychologist, know how to create bridges between people who have different sexual orientations, between basically straight sexual orientation and LGBT community, and that's a hard work. It's not easy because it's simply something that our community has to come to terms with and has a difficulty to really go through the process of understanding someone of a different orientation. Same thing is happening, as I see it, in the religious communities. And we just had a little bit discussion, pre-show stage discussion about the fact that we cannot escape the fact that the world is an interfaith community. And anywhere you go, really, and we are located in Orange County, California, Southern California area. Even here, no matter where you go, what streets you step on, there are people of different faiths around us. So that's just something that just came to my mind in terms of how can we even ignore that? How can we kind of go back into our shells, almost escaping the realities of life? So I would like to get your opinion in terms of how you see the possibility for members of these different faith communities understanding each other, coming to terms with these differences, and kind of putting these differences aside and hopefully looking at some commonalities.
Yes, right. Well, a long time ago I was asked what my mission was, and I thought very deeply about that, and I finally decided that my mission is to serve as a bridge of peace between people of all faiths. Early on, I really saw the importance of understanding one another. I went to a school where actually my particular religious upbringing was Protestant, and at that particular school, I was in the minority. There were more Catholic students than Protestant students, and there were more Jewish students than Catholic or Protestant students. And many of the Jewish students were children of or or related to Holocaust survivors. So we had kind of a special kind of kinship, the children from all of these different backgrounds, because we learned a lot about each other. We went to each other's homes, we attended confirmations or first communions in some cases, bar mitzvahs. And so for me, that training began very early. And I lived for many years in Hawaii, and in Hawaii also there is a wonderful tossed salad of cultures and religions. So for me, this was just something that was very interesting to me. But then I encountered the people who wanted to separate themselves out, who felt that their religion was the only religion or the only right religion and everybody else was wrong. And I frequently found myself questioning that. And so as I went into the ministry, which has been what I had always wanted to do, right away I wanted to make a difference in terms of how we all get along. And I think the work of interfaith understanding is about hearing each other's stories. One of our very first meetings that we held, we asked each other to share the background of our family name. And I come from Scottish-Irish people. Other people came from a Jewish background and had lived perhaps in Germany during the Holocaust. Others came from other backgrounds. But by hearing the stories of the origins of our names, we learned a tremendous amount about our belief systems. And we built a bond of friendship that is so rich and deep, and it continues today. But we have also learned a great deal about one another's faith. I think some people are reluctant or afraid to walk into a house of worship different than their own. And if one will walk into a house of worship different from their own, they will find in each house of worship something beautiful. Perhaps it's the music. Perhaps it's the way in which people pray. Perhaps it's chanting. Perhaps it's simply the beauty of the building that you're in. But in every way, what you will find is there is a reverence and a love of this higher power that is known by many names that I call God. And whether one has a belief in a Messiah such as Jesus, or who holds a stronger relationship with Moses, or who has the worshiping and the knowledge and the teaching of Muhammad, may peace be upon him, whatever that particular path is, we are all learning to be better people. We are all learning to live a life that is good and that brings us to a higher level of understanding. We all have many of the same questions. Where do we go when we die? What happens to our soul when it moves from this experience into the next one? How do we treat our neighbor? All of those things are found in every great tradition. And when we begin to see those threads, we begin to see commonality and common truths. And I could go on and on and on.
That's fantastic. I was just listening to you. I'm amazed and overcome by joy to listen to what you're bringing to the fore, and that is really wonderful. Let me address a few things, if you don't mind.
Please.
Which is one thing that just stood out for me right here is kind of easy to miss, and let me bring that out. And we hear in a lot of news, media, and discussions and debates and all kinds of discourse basically about different religions, where one person is talking about the idols or revered symbols or entities within another religion, kind of very casually. Like, for instance, somebody could just say Jesus rather than, let's say, Jesus the Lord, if you will. Or somebody could easily say Muhammad. But you notice what you did is a little bit different, which is very subtle, and that's wonderful, so respectful, even though you're not Muslim. We know from the Muslim community that when they call upon their prophet Muhammad, they follow it by may peace be upon him or his family. And people who are not Muslims are not aware of that unless they have been exposed. They have been kind of informed about what is a respectful reference. And you did that. And that is very amazing to me. And that's exactly why I'm so overjoyed. Not because it is, you did this for a symbol or an entity in the Islam religion or the Muslim religion, but because of your sensitivity. And that is wonderful. That's what I am excited about, and that's what I'm talking about when it comes to crossing these roads, if you will, and building bridges between communities. If we can be respectful of another person's faith, regardless how they it may seem or what kind of norms they adhere to, as long as it is basically revolving around health, peace, functional being of a human being in the society, I believe then we can really pay attention to each other's belief systems from a very effective and healthy fashion, where basically we open doors rather than close doors.
Yes.
And this is just a subtle thing, and not everybody is aware of these subtle differences, but that's why we are doing this show, because we want to, and by show or program we mean an educational video about how can we, or possibilities, how we can cross these roads between these different religions, because like you mentioned, they have each one of them, or members of the society with different religions, they have their own stories and their upbringing and a lot of commonality with each other once we sit down and listen to each other's stories.
Yes.
And that is so powerful, as you mentioned, especially with children. That is what we see quite, there's quite a contrast. If adults, older adults who are not as well informed or equally exposed to one another's culture, or basically more or less isolated in their own belief system, if they sat down together, they would mostly begin to debate and argue. But then children are different, because they're simply because they have less of a set of preconceived notions and norms and beliefs to believe in. So what they come in with is this curiosity. They come in with curiosity to learn from one another.
Right.
So if we can just, and that's something we can borrow from psychology. Psychology basically teaches us that there is that difference between, let's say, this group of people and those group of people that use or that uses curiosity to get to know each other. And that's what you mentioned when you listen to stories of your schoolmates. And that kind of illuminated certain things for you and for them. And to this day, you have a reverence for their belief system they have for you, and you remain good friends. And that's why I want to really promote this interfaith crossroads that we are creating. Because I personally am fed up with violence.
Me too.
You know, yesterday, let me share this with you, which was amazing, very amazing observation. I was in the gym working out, and then I kind of walked out and I saw this short summary synopsis of 35 years of CNN. Yesterday was their 35-year anniversary. And they, within 30 minutes, they summarized all these 35 years. And they basically came up with, one event, kind of a snapshot of one event after another. I think it was 1980 when they started. So what happened in 1980? What happened in 1982, 87, 88, and so forth. And all of that amounted to about 30 minutes of, if you will, more or less spectacular and almost very much atrocious event, one event after the other. And there was another guy standing there, and he jokingly said, look at that, for 35 years, we have 30 minutes of footage to cover 35 years of catastrophes, of horrific events happening. But today, you can actually, within a day, go around the world and put probably an hour-long footage of horrific, catastrophic events together. Isn't that sad?
Yeah, that
That
is sad.
today, even within one day, we can have a lot more atrocities, a lot more catastrophes than about 35 years of history, which to me it was showing that look at this trend of violence, that is intensifying around the world. And as we know, with all the issues that are happening in the Middle East and in Africa and everywhere, really, not just, but also Europe, United States, everywhere, all these types of adversarial conflicts between people. How can we really overcome that? So that's why I said I'm fed up with it. How much more violence do we want to have on a daily basis? I'd rather not have that. I'd rather kind of focus, and that's why I've chosen this profession of clinical psychologist, because every day I'm working with 20, 30 people on how to improve their lives, how to move beyond biases and prejudice, look at the positive, strengthen the person within,
Right.
And kind of overcome obstacles and not get stuck in helplessness and victimization and kind of self-defeating behaviors, right? So that's why I'm passionate about our Interfaith Crossroads. We usually take a short break, if you don't mind, with our viewers, just for our sponsors to send their messages, and then we continue. So if you give us a minute, we'll be right back.
Hi, welcome to Adelante. This is Adelante Recovery, and my name is Yvette Kuglin, and I'm part of the staff.
Adelante Recovery Center has helped people in dual diagnosis for 5 years. We accept most PPO insurances and provide luxury accommodations and 24-hour support. To speak with an admissions counselor, call 1-888-242-4450.
A lot of time we don't even know what's wrong with us, and sometimes we need to get away to figure that out. So if you want to go for a little retreat out in Corona Del Mar, which is a confidential location, we're here to help. So we're only a phone call away. Thank you.
Welcome back to Interfaith Crossroads on Therapy Cable. We are continuing our discussion on how to build bridges between people from different religious and spiritual backgrounds who live amongst us, all around us in the community. So it is really time for us to look at how to reach across and build bridges and understand one another rather than fight with each other. So we were talking about a lot of things. Now, right now, what you brought up was the notion of fear. So it is huge. I completely agree with you. So what do you think of that? How come fear?
Well, first of all, people become fearful when they don't know enough, fear of the unknown. And so when we meet a person who is different than ourselves and maybe dresses differently or speaks a different language or in some way is different, if we're not willing to keep the eyes of a child and remain open and curious, we could become fearful. Oh, they're different than I am. I should be careful. Rather than, oh, they're different than I am. Maybe I can learn something about them. I always like to equate it to a garden, that we can't just have the same plant throughout the entire garden, all the same color. The garden has no richness, but the lushness of shrubbery and flowers, and that's what makes a garden beautiful. And we live in a garden. We live in a garden of humanity. But so often that fear is exactly what causes the violence that you were talking about with the CNN. And the more that we focus on fear, the more we generate fear. And the more we generate fear, the more we generate reactive behavior. And reactive behavior is usually not grace-filled or loving behavior. So part of the work then is to truly to really take the time to learn about one another, to dispel those fears, to begin to hear the stories, to ask the questions. I know everybody says you should never talk about religion or politics. Well, I think that's true in terms of we should never try to sway someone else to believe the way we do about politics or religion. But I think we do need to talk about religion in terms of, tell me what it is about your faith that you love, what touches your heart, so that we could share from that place with one another. That dispels fear. That is what opens us up to see that we're all part of that one garden, of that one God, that one power. And even for those who have no belief at all, we still can believe in a garden and that we live in one. And when we can do that, then we create a garden that is beautiful, where we can really look at one another and see our interconnectedness rather than our differences.
Fantastic. I'd like to add to that two concepts. One is kind of a lack of, I would say, focus and attention on actually studying religion in any field. I think, like you mentioned, the common belief is not to talk or discuss religion in public, if you will, as well as politics, where as it's not only, I would say, a common belief in kind of social norms, in parties or family get-togethers, etc., but also there is a little bit of almost like resistance to studying impact of religion, let's say, on psychology, or impact of psychology on religion. To give you an example, if you look at a curriculum, the training curriculum of all therapists and psychotherapists and psychologists and counselors, throughout 4 to 7 years of studying and education, there is, if any, probably just 1, maximum 2 courses on religious understanding. From more than at least 30 or 40 subjects that are being taught, or 30 or 40 courses, or more than 100 to 120 units. You only have 3 units on, if any, by the way, because many, or I would say 80% to 90% of clinical training curricula do not even include religious studies. And then on the other hand, you have schools like what is that seminary? I forget the name of the seminary that is focusing on the religious psychotherapy, if you will. Fuller Seminary. Yeah. That's what they do. They train therapists who basically cater to religious groups and individuals and doing therapy according to religious beliefs. But then why this isolation? Why this separation? Why don't we bring a higher awareness of a person's religious beliefs into psychotherapy? Unfortunately, that is missing. That's one thing that I wanted to bring up, which is, I believe, a disservice, because we, as psychotherapists, we cannot really choose the religion of our clients. If a client is in need and comes in and says, I'm struggling with my child, and I'm struggling with parenting, I'm struggling with depression, I have bipolar, etc., and somehow they found us, and now we establish rapport and trust, and we enter into a therapeutic relationship, and we go through months or sometimes years of work with them. How can we do that competently if we cannot understand their religious background and perspective, or at least have had some training in addressing their therapeutic issues and concerns given the religious framework? How can we do that? That's not competence, in my opinion. So therefore, certainly a lot of therapists by themselves, they seek further competence and further education by learning about religious beliefs and educating themselves how to engage in a therapeutic relationship with someone who is religious. But I believe that is something, again, that shouldn't be this isolated and kind of encapsulated and separated from the mainstream curriculum and training of any therapist, of the average therapist. So that's one thing that comes to my mind. And the second thing, when you mentioned discussion, where we are dissuaded from discussing religion or politics in public, I think the problem with that is something more deeper. Where the underlying problem that I see with that is because most people have learned to debate and argue.
Yes, instead of have dialogue.
Exactly.
I agree.
Exactly. So
I agree.
if, like you mentioned, we don't want to sway someone's or opinion or convictions, in a different direction. We want to have a dialogue. And dialogue goes back to a stance where a person starts with the curiosity again. I want to learn about you. That's the start of a dialogue.
And a dialogue does not have to come to a conclusion of right or wrong. It's not about that. It's about remaining open and learning and leaving it open.
Absolutely. So these are great things that we are discussing. I'm very happy to have started this conversation with you on Interfaith Crossroads. So we kind of come to a summary of what we need to do. Like you mentioned, in order to really open the doors, I would say, sharing stories. That's one of the best ways of informing one another about our human side, independent of our religious beliefs, or even including our religious beliefs. So share our human story.
Yes.
Which I think we would put on the table for Interfaith Crossroads. Number 2 is addressing fear. Fear of the unknown, fear of being different. And which we, again, from psychology we call that, or sociology we call that xenophobia, fear of strange people, or strangeness, if you will, which we know it has a purpose. There is a reason that every human being in the world is afraid of the unknown, but then that's more of a primitive reaction, where what we are promoting here and calling for is that we may want to have a little bit more mindfulness added to that fear. So to examine, do I even need to have fear of somebody who is different than me or not? Maybe there is a greater benefit in getting to know them rather than fearing them. So that's another thing we can put on the table. And the third one being the fact that we should start a dialogue.
Yes.
Dialogue between
Absolutely.
people. So I'm really a big proponent of that, because also in my private practice as a clinical psychologist, I promote the practice of and what I call effective dialogue, which requires, like you mentioned, there's certain tenets to it, which we can go into it later, but this is a perfect idea. So now what I would like to do is see, how do you see we can the kind of the opportunities of Interfaith Crossroads developing from here, given the fact that we can establish some dialogue between people of different faiths?
Well, I think what you're doing right now is really good. We didn't get into what my particular path teaches, but in future programs, perhaps we can do that, because I belong to a pathway called New Thought, which broke away from traditional Christianity back in the early 1900s. So we have a little bit different viewpoint on the teachings of Jesus. We certainly believe in them, but we are much more inclusive in our teaching. So it would be interesting.
Great.
But also, I think just the idea of perhaps a round table with people of several different traditions and having a couple of questions that we can each answer from our own standpoint about what we believe.
Fantastic.
Without making anybody else wrong.
Yeah.
Because I believe we all find our path, the path that allows us to have the deepest sense of connection and reverence to that power, that infinite, the ineffable, in all the many ways we name it. And so it's natural that we're going to have some different viewpoints. People within the same religion have different viewpoints.
Absolutely.
All you have to do is start reading theologians and see that. So it's not about right or wrong. It's how we can try to understand something that is so much greater than we are. That it's way beyond the blind man and the elephant. It is way bigger than that.
Right.
And that wonderful power and presence is way too big for just one religion also. But it's having the reverence for that. And then realizing that as part of humanity, we are all interfaith. We are all different plants in the garden.
Absolutely.
And that's a really important thing to remember.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. That was a great addition. So we will start with that, learning about the new thought.
Okay.
I would love to do that and actually have a dialogue with you next time.
Okay, good.
And so we bring that out. So we start from there and then think about putting together a panel of people from different traditions to continue that dialogue between us.
Great.
How does that sound?
Sounds wonderful.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
So thank you again,
Thank
Reverend.
you.
I appreciate your presence here on Therapy Cable.
Thank you.
And thank you to our viewers and listeners for watching Therapy Cable and Interfaith Crossroads. Please join us for another edition and segment of Interfaith Crossroads on Therapy Cable very soon.